Welcome back, AP. All right, so the long-awaited, long-overdue Napoleon flip that will be the basis of your LEQ for your midterm on Tuesday, right? So remember, you should definitely be writing this stuff down. I'm going to try my best to keep it like under 25 minutes, but then again, at the same time, I'm talking about probably my most favorite historical figure of all time, right? Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, before we go anywhere, a lot of people have like enduring debates, questions, key conceptual battles about this particular figure. Is he the savior of the revolution, or is he just the conqueror of Europe, right? Is he the guy that is liberal, or is he conservative? What was he, more of the same or something new, right? Maybe me asking a lot of these questions will give you a clue into the thing that I might be asking you on your midterm, right? So remember, your LEQ, though, is going to be like 5 paragraphs, okay? Intro, 3 bodies, and a conclusion about, who knows, maybe if you think one of those things is completely true or the other one's completely true, or if maybe they're a little bit of both. I don't know. You decide. Now, anyway, so let's talk about his early years, right? His earliest years, funny enough, has to do with the fact that he's not even French, all right? So most people don't even know this, that Napoleon himself, not even a French person, right? Wasn't even a French citizen until after he was born. He was actually born as an Italian citizen on the island of Corsica, right, in 1768. Now, when he was also born with 8 siblings to a low nobility family within the Corsican government, right? So his parents spoke Italian and Corsican, which was actually a dialectual combination of French and Italian a little bit. Now, his parents were living on the island, and at age 9, by that point, 300,000 French people show up and occupy Corsica. So while he was alive and as a boy, Corsica was taken over by the French, right? Just kind of keep that in mind. Now, when he actually at age 9 enrolls into this French military school, he got these things because of his early brilliance, right? He showed signs of being adept in problem solving, a great mathematics student. Scientifically speaking, he was also very, very solid as a young, educated person, right? Now, while he was away at military school, he was often teased. So basically, Napoleon is the product of why you shouldn't bully people, because they might take over your entire continent, right? Now, Napoleon's often teased for his Corsican accent. He never actually fully learned, even up until his death, how to read or write fluently in French because of the differences in the key parts of the language, right? Now, very teased for his Corsican accent and his height, right? Now, everybody always says that, oh, isn't Napoleon super short? He's 3'6", right? No, Napoleon was 5'7", all right? There's 2 common confusions about his height. Number 1 is the fact that he was 5'2" in the French units that actually were changed up by the Committee of Public Safety. Remember when we talked about the Committee of Public Safety and how they changed the days of the week to 10-day weeks and then 12 different months, all with different names like Thermidor and Bruxelles and Croissant and all these other weird French words, right? Thermidor, of course, being the hot month when Maximilian Robespierre got shot in the face. Now, anyway, in French units that the Committee of Public Safety adopted, he was 5'2" at his death. When you convert that over, he's actually 5'7". And 5'7" was the average height of a peasant during this time period. Now, some of you would debate, well, peasants don't really have the greatest nutrition, and they're not going to grow to be the biggest they possibly could be in those early 1,000 days. My wife taught me that. So, now, I said 1,000. That's what I said. Really? Are we debating over early and first right now?
I just want them to know.
Okay. My wife would like you to know that it's actually the first 1,000 days that are very crucial, which we had a little conversation over breakfast about how, in the 1700s, infant mortality rate was still so brutal, right? Makes a lot of sense. Now, he quickly earns the respect of his peers, though, by working hard and working his way up through the ranks and actually growing to become a brilliant military strategist. When he graduates the Paris Military School and Paris Military Academy, he exits as a lieutenant for the artillery. So he actually was a lieutenant of he was a lieutenant of the cannon division, actually, when he graduated. Now, before we go any further, right, you can start jotting this down, that's fine. He actually even turned on the French for a short amount of time. Napoleon actually wrote like diatribes of his hatred of the fact that his people, the Corsicans, were occupied by the French, right? So he actually had a small stint when he went back home following his graduation where he actually fought for Corsican independence. But when that independence movement kind of fizzled out, he returns to France to fight, ironically enough, for the revolution, right? So following the 1789 revolution, Napoleon became a very, very big advocate for the revolution, right? He won several important battles against the Austrians and the Prussians, which of course was that first coalition army, right? Now, he quickly, though, becomes a general and saves the Directory later on, right? So while some of you are like, whoa, 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 how did we just skip all that other stuff in between, right? How did we go from, like, Louis still alive while Napoleon's around to now he's dead and the Directory's around? Well, during that entire gap, Napoleon was fighting off a lot of these major battles. He had key victories in northern Italy, right, where he actually destroyed a coalition army in northern Italy and pushed the Austrians back, right? The biggest beef between these two factions is the French versus the Austrians. Keep that in mind, all right? The Austrians, the French, right? A lot of animosity there because, of course, Marie Antoinette being the Habsburg princess that she is, right? So, and also on the other side, you got a couple of remaining Habsburg monarchs, of course, in Spain, and their infrastructure is still viable there, right? So France felt closed in during their revolution, and also keep in mind that they themselves were being attacked, right? The Declaration of Pillnitz was a borderline declaration of war. Kill Louis, we'll come after you. Well, they killed Louis, and so they prepared to came after, right? Now, after all this kind of stuff starts going on, so he has huge victories in northern Italy, and his name begins to spread. People are like, oh, have you heard about this guy named Napoleon? Oh, he's dashing. There's this new painting of him crossing the Alps. He looks so good. All right, so he quickly becomes a general, saves the Directory, in which is the post-revolution government, from royalist forces, right? So the royalists are like bubbling up, and they want to reinstall the king and the monarchy and put the Bourbons back in power, right? Because here's the thing. The rest of Europe, particularly that of the coalition armies, are scared to death of this idea of a republic and legislative bodies and equality before the law spreading throughout the continent. So they're doing their best to stop him, right? So to stop the revolution. But Napoleon, being the general that he is, beats him at every single turn, right? Now, Napoleon also, though, ironically enough, begins to look over at the long-standing rival of the French, the British, right? He felt as though the British were still economically putting up shields in front of France that prevented them from making money through trade so they could actually prosper as this new revolutionary government. So he decides to do a very key thing. He wants to break their back economically by going into Egypt and Syria and taking out their forces there. By taking out their forces there, you will kill their North African trade routes that actually keep them economically stable, and it also is another stop-off point of their crown jewel. You take out the Northern African market, there goes the Indian market later, right? So and that's the crown jewel. The British government is the country of India, right? So let's stop them midway, take out North Africa. Well, like the Egyptian campaign had massive victories all on land, all right? Keep that in mind, all on land. Because he's an artillery general, right? He favors overwhelming force, speedy attacks, heavy cannon fire, destroy them with overwhelming force. So had huge victories on land at several different battles, right? So there's one that's really cool. It's called the Battle of the Great Pyramids, right? Or the Pyramids of Giza. There's a battle that took place right out front of it. And then that, of course, became a big story later on about how, Napoleon shot a gun and he hit the Sphinx in the nose and that's why it fell off. That's not true, all right? So, but it's just kind of a cool story. Now, in his invasion, though, the death blow comes to his invasion of Egypt when he tries to square off against the one man he could never beat in open battle, Horatio Nelson, Admiral Horatio Nelson, right? At the Battle of the Nile, he loses a major naval engagement. So this is a clear kind of foreshadowing of the fact that Napoleon can win any fight on land, except in Russia. He can win just about any fight on land. No, but naval strategy, not his thing. All right, so Admiral Horatio Nelson, though, pushes him back and prevents him at the Battle of the Nile from going any further. And this, of course, fosters even more hatred of Britain, right? So now, continuing forward, though, in 1799, he returns to popular acclaim, even though he lost the invasions of Egypt, right? So in 1799, he returns, and they're like, oh, our savior has returned with his major military victories. They didn't care necessarily that he didn't win the invasion of Egypt. They just cared that he struck a blow at the British economy a little bit, right? So in 1799, recruited by that guy, you remember Abbé Sieyès, What is the Third Estate? He actually at the time was a director, right? He was one of the 5 directors, right, of the Directory. And he talks to Napoleon, and he's like, we need to overthrow this weak garbage government. And I think you're the guy to do it, right? Now, in his mind, Abbé Sieyès was like, I will be the leader that actually becomes the leader of the French people, right? What is the third estate? Haha, I'm Abbé Sieyès. I am going to be in charge of this whole thing. But Napoleon does this. He launches a coup within a coup. Yeah, mind-blowing, right? So Napoleon actually launched a coup d'etat in 1799, which is a sudden seizure or overthrow of a government on the weak and the corrupt Directory. Annie Hatch and Jenna Brady in class the other day discussed that that should be our class project, you know, that we should take a trip to a weak country and perform a coup and take over, right? And I don't think it's a bad idea, but maybe we'll just have a coup d'etat over like Mr. Keogh or something like that. You know, like, now Napoleon is victorious, and he seizes control of France, and he establishes a 3-man branch called the Consulate, right? Consulate. This is another kind of image of his obsession with 2 things. He was a big fan of Alexander the Great, which a lot of people say that's why he wanted to take Egypt, which was the former capital of his empire. A lot of people say also his hairstyle was Alexander. Like when he was a young guy, he loved to have the big flowy frock of just, it's all over the place and looks boyish, right? So him and Pompey apparently had the same hairstyle, which was emblematic of Alexander. But the consulate, calling yourself the consulate, is actually the old name of the Roman government, right? So that's like another image of like this obsession with the antiquity, the era of antiquity that Napoleon always had. Now, really quick though, when you think about it, he established himself as the first consul, right? Which means he had more power than the other 2 consuls in that consulate. Now, despite the fact that the King Louis XVI is now dead as of 1792, why are the people supporting a new absolutist, which is Napoleon? Because is this not kind of anti-revolutionary to install yourself as an absolutist rule, right? Well, some people argue that the French had grown so tired of the violence, the Committee of Public Safety, the mass executions of the Committee of Public Safety, the jockeying back and forth, the civil war within the country of the anti-revolutionary forces fighting innocent people in the countryside, that they would rather have peace and order than bloodshed and uncertainty. So they grabbed on to the most acclaimed general, right? The guy who controls the military and protects us abroad will protect us at home as well, right? So going forward, though, then, of course, begins the era of the Napoleonic Wars, right? The Napoleonic Wars, while he is consulate, he actually is just being attacked on all sides by other European powers. A lot of people are like, well, you know, Napoleon didn't have to take over everything. Well, this is not completely his fault, right? Because the European powers were attacking him, right? So in the first coalition, which was the French Revolutionary, the First Republic of France, when they became their own republic after the death of Louis. Yeah, or like right before the death of Louis, when they declared themselves the French First Republic. They fought against the Austrian forces in the Netherlands and in Holland and actually took those areas into their empire. And in northern Italy under Napoleon, when he took northern Italy for the French First Republic, right? That was the first coalition. Then that finally comes to a peace. And then there was a second coalition, right? In the second coalition, he comes in midway after his Egypt campaign and keeps pushing forward and goes all the way up to the Rhine River, right? So he is defeating these armies left and right and all of these like coalition armies, which are these groups of allied countries, mainly that of Prussia, Austria, Britain, Russia, and then a few thrown in there as well, like Holland, Saxony, Bavaria, different areas like that are also going to coalition themselves against him. Now, like seizing on this fervor, though, in the War of the Third Coalition, everybody's freaking out, right? Everybody's flipping out. And so what Napoleon does is taking the victorious French and his huge amount of acclaim and his bolstered sense of attitude and positivity, he actually crowns himself emperor of France, right? Because the area is growing into an empire, right? They are growing and growing and growing and sucking up different countries. He actually conquers almost the entire Papal States. We'll talk about that later. But so he also, during this crowning ceremony, though, invites the Pope. He actually brought Catholicism back to France. Jot that down somewhere. He brings Catholicism back to France, right? Because we talked about the Reign of Terror and like the de-Christianization of the entire country, where they tried to turn Notre Dame into a shopping mall and tried to get rid of Mass on Sundays and they actually outlawed Sundays. Like they just got rid of Sundays. They just called it a different day, right? So in his coronation ceremony, he actually, Pope Pius VII was supposed to place the crown onto Napoleon's head, signifying his era from, like, his new reign from God, right? Like an absolutist, again, which is not that revolutionary, right? But what is revolutionary about Napoleon is he stood up and took the crown from the Pope's hands and placed it on his own head, signifying that the power of France lies within through him, right? So it also signifies the power of the Catholic Church. There's a great painting of him. Actually, I'll show you really quick. Napoleon crowns Josephine. And this is his wife, Josephine. And in this painting, he actually is seen crowning Josephine on his own instead of actually... Oh, isn't that ironic? I'm talking about Josephine, and then our dog Josie is in the trash. Huh, weird, right? In this picture right here, you can actually see Pope Pius VII looking away, being like a tool about it, and then him crowning his queen, his wife, Josephine, actually, who is kneeling before him, showing his power above everyone. And where'd it go? Present, there it is. So with this as a part of it, though, later on in about 1809, he unfortunately, don't write this down, this is just a good story. In 1809, he actually, during the War of the Fourth Coalition, I think it's Fourth Coalition, I'll double check that, but in the War of the Fourth Coalition, Josephine, his wife, who he crowned himself, had not produced him an heir, had not produced a son. She actually had two stepchildren in this entire, like, scenario. She was married before she ever met Napoleon. So she was married, and her husband died, and and actually was executed during the Reign of Terror by Robespierre himself. And so she was left being the mother to two children, and he adopted them when he married Josephine. But he looked at her apparently at dinner one night and was like, "You and I can't be together if I can't have a son with you." And so he divorces her, right? So this is something coming up later in the Napoleonic Code, which is kind of messed up to women, right? So the thing about it is Josephine accepts this, apparently amicably, apparently accepts this divorce, and she is devastated. However, they remain friends, and he then turns around and marries Marie Louise, who's an Austrian princess, right? So this was a move to ally the center sector of Europe, which includes the Holy Roman Empire and the Austrian Habsburgs. So he has now just taken up a third of Europe with just a marriage, right? So Marie Louise, he marries her. This proves to be a wise move because it also produces him a son, Louis Napoleon, right? So who would later on become King of Rome. So here are another list of major accomplishments that Napoleon did while he was in power, right? So some of them are very revolutionary. Some of them are not, right? So he built the largest empire in Europe since Rome, right? He sold the Louisiana Territory to the United States. So Spain, right, when he actually went in, he goes in and he takes over Spain. And I'll show you a map here in a second of all these things. It'll make a lot more sense in a sec. But he takes Spain into his empire as well, right? And in that portion, like right before that in 1802, he buys the Louisiana Territory from Spain that they had lost in the French and Indian War, right? And then he turns around in 1803 and then he sells it to the U.S. for $15 million, which back then was a heck of a lot of money, right? He sets up a fair tax code, which is based on your income, right? He let Haiti become independent after killing Toussaint Louverture and trying to reinstate slavery in all of the French colonies. Ooh. So that's not very revolutionary, right? Not very revolutionary to try and let slavery exist, but then it is revolutionary to let them become independent when you realize that it's not financially gaining for your country to hold on to it anymore. He hires government officials based on merit. This one's huge. How were government officials hired before Napoleon? based on hereditary rights, okay? Hereditary rights. So who you were born to, what noble family you were from dictated these things. Well, his government officials were hired based on merit, how hard they had worked. He created the first public school called lycees, right? He actually had, he believed that his entire populace should be able to read, which is very, very, very revolutionary. He restored Catholicism to France, which is also very revolutionary. He also advocated for these three things: freedom of religion, fairness before the law, and property. Property rights, the right to your own property that no one can take from you. And also he creates the Napoleonic Code, right? The Napoleonic Code was a series of laws, right? The Grand Empire was a series of laws, right? It was a series of laws that were very, very important to him, that he actually was very, very powerful in using, okay? So, however, his Napoleonic Code was really messed up to women. Women actually had less rights under the Napoleonic Code than that of a minor. All right, so like minor men had more rights than their own mother, okay? They couldn't divorce, they couldn't inherit property, they couldn't do much of anything. They were subordinate in the family following that, which is really messed up and very anti-revolutionary because the revolution actually advocated for the rights of women. But here are his three big, hold on, let me roll back. So this is the Napoleonic Empire, everything in pink, right? So everything in pink is an empire. If you see this right here, under French control, like little like slashes right there, that means that they occupy that area, right? They occupied Spain and all of this. Oh, also, write this down for this grand empire. The death of the Holy Roman Empire. He kills the HRE, right? So he destroys it completely and eradicates them off the map, right? So he kills the HRE. They don't even exist anymore. And he calls them the Confederation of the Rhine. He actually liberates Poland from Russia, Austria, and Prussia, trying to bring them on, and he calls them the Grand Duchy of Warsaw, right? He occupies Paris, he occupies Italy, he occupies all these areas. Now, and all these things right here, these darker pinks, they're allied with France out of fear, right? In all these areas in pink, though, one little fun fact, he actually installed his relatives as their kings. His brothers, his brothers-in-law, right? Several different other figures. He actually got one of his brother actually married Josephine's his stepdaughter, which is really weird. Now, his three biggest mistakes, though, are these things right here. And we'll be quick about this stuff. The continental system, the Peninsular War, and the invasion of Russia, and all this leads to his eventual downfall, right? Now, the continental system is something about him that is very non-revolutionary, right? The continental system was a Napoleon attempted to naval blockade and prevent Britain from trading with the rest of Europe, right? Many nations ignore this, and Britain was able to bust through it, right? Because they thought, if we're going to kill Britain, let's kill them through their wallet, right? So they end up losing this entire thing because the Britain's naval forces proved to just be more strong, right? At the Battle of Trafalgar, right? At the Battle of Trafalgar, when Napoleon tried to land in Britain and take them out early when they were taking over Holland and trying to attack Denmark, at the Battle of Trafalgar, the entire French Navy was decimated by who then again? Admiral Horatio Nelson, who unfortunately died during the battle. He got shot in the back by a sharpshooter, and since the musket ball had so much spin on it, it got shot him in the back, bounced off his shoulder blade, went through his spine, and hit the other shoulder blade and lodged itself in there. He went limp and actually died 3 hours later from complications due to the injury, and he was paralyzed. Now, the continental system was meant to try and kill them through their wallet, right? No one in the Grand Empire was allowed to trade with Britain. However, many nations are going to ignore this, and Britain's going to be able to bust through it. Portugal and Russia were the biggest violators, right? So then there was the Peninsular War, which was because of this breaking of the continental system, right? France attacked Portugal for ignoring the continental system, right? So in their process of occupying Spain due to this, and then also trying to occupy Portugal, Spain for over 6 straight years wages guerrilla warfare on the French, right? Inflicts massive casualties on the French military and weakens the French military on the peninsula, and so the French military kind of struggled to hold on to it. And they were just losing men day after day after day after day. This is the other thing, too, about Napoleon that's very non-revolutionary. Millions were dead after the Napoleonic Wars. So, that's a big problem. But guerrilla warfare in Spain, you need to know that that was a big problem. Now, then you had, of course, his invasion of Russia. Napoleon decides to invade Russia because of Alexander I, Tsar Alexander, being a big, big, big punk about it, because they decided to re-engage trade with Britain, right? Russia re-engages trade with Britain, and Russia decides, all right, let's go ahead and get ready to defend ourselves. Here come the French and the Grand Army of Napoleon, 600,000 strong, right? And Napoleon is crushing it. They're going into Russia, and this is right around fall, right, in the autumn, and they're just cruising through Russia, getting win after win after win after win after win after win. And this is around the era of the Fifth Coalition, win after win after win after win. And they actually occupy and burn Moscow, right? The thing about it, though, is as you go deeper and deeper into Russia, and it starts getting colder and colder, the Russians use this thing called scorched earth, where in retreat, as they were going back to Moscow, they burned every single supply that the French could possibly use. By doing this, right, they actually sucked them further and further inside to Russia, right? And they just kept them coming and kept them coming and kept them coming. So when the French have to retreat, there was nothing there to survive off of. So when they never received a surrender from the Tsar, he decides to retreat. 590,000 of his 600,000 French troops froze to death, which would be one of the worst ways to go. And due to this failed invasion, he actually was greatly weakened and forced to abdicate the throne under the sixth, count it finally, the sixth coalition, right? A huge coalition of Prussia, Britain, Russia, and several others involved, and the Austrians kind of turned on him. They had a huge force, and they forced him to abdicate the throne, and he was banished to the Isle of Elba in 1815, right? Now, the problem with the Isle of Elba is it's kind of right off the coast of Italy, right? And he kind of managed to escape, right? So he actually escapes, and after a year on Elba, he raises a small army, and he escapes back to France, right? And he tries to take it all over. Another coalition is formed. He wants to become emperor again, and he attempts to strengthen his army, but the French, some of the French actually welcomed him back, right? He was there for about 100 days, and he had several early victories, but to finish him off for good, the British, the Prussians, they meet him at Waterloo in Holland, and they in Belgium. They meet him at Waterloo in Belgium, and they destroy him in an embarrassing loss. And his inexperienced army that actually he had to draft up was defeated by this coalition. And he's exiled for good, and he ends up going to St. Helena off the coast of Africa, where he dies of stomach cancer, right? So it's very, very unfortunate. And after 6 years on Helena, he dies of stomach cancer in 1821. And a lot of controversy surrounds his death. Some people say he was poisoned. Others say that he was a part of, he actually, didn't die at all, that he, left and lived in Africa until much later. A lot of people thought that the British actually were a part of the cause of death, but I don't know. I think he probably just died. But the biggest thing about the legacy of him, let me, really quick, speaking of his legacy, there's one other thing he discovered while he was in Egypt that I forgot to tell you. So this thing in Egypt, which is really cool, his forces discovered it. It's called the Rosetta Stone. It's how we actually have the ability to, decipher Egyptian hieroglyphics. This Rosetta Stone is actually written in 3 different sections: ancient Greek, simplified Egyptian, and then complex Egyptian hieroglyphics in the same passage. So it's the same writing, 1, 2, 3, and now that's why we actually have the ability, because of Napoleon, to decipher hieroglyphics. Sorry, I just had to throw that in there. Now, really quick though, his legacy, he's one of the most debated figures in history. Is he liberal with his new rights of property law, public schools, and allowing the new ideas of the revolution to hold on, or is he conservative because he was an absolutist dictator and he wanted to take over the continent of Europe? And the continental system is just a series of mercantile laws. You know what I mean? That's a mercantilistic thing. That's an absolutist thing. Is he revolutionary with trying to save the people of France and push toward nationalism, or is he anti-revolutionary by trying to suppress the rights of women, right? Is he a child of the Enlightenment by trying to be positive, increase the intelligence of his people, and set up a merit-based system of promotion? Or is he just an absolutist that put people in power that he liked, right? So it's a big debate. I'll let you decide. Y'all have a great one. I'll see you guys on Tuesday.